Thank you very much. I know that there's been a lot of expertise shared, and there's a lot more expertise in the room, so I will try and keep it very brief. Let me just say, a lot of people have talked, Steve and Rosa have talked very well about some of the technical issues. I think I want to talk a little bit more about some of the political issues, if that is okay. And I would like to use the framework by a famous Russian anarchist, the framework of revolution versus reform. This is the famous essay by Rosa Luxemburg. But instead of revolution versus reform, I think we need both revolution and reform. So, if we're talking about revolution in the context of agriculture, in the context of food security, even in the context of food price volatility, what are we talking about? A revolution away from it. We're talking about a revolution away from this model of industrial agriculture. This is something that was pushed on countries starting in the 1970s, late 1960s, if you like, but especially in the 1970s and 80s. What does this model look like? It is clearly part of the capitalist system. We've discussed that in different ways. But it also has a heavy reliance on inputs. That is chemical fertilizer, hybrid seeds. The important thing to remember about hybrid seeds is that they do not reproduce. Any hybrid, if you have a mule, which is a hybrid between a donkey and a horse, it does not reproduce. So farmers cannot keep the seeds. Chemical pesticides, irrigated water. This model was told, we were told in the 1970s that this model is the solution to global hunger, but it did not decrease the number of hungry in the world. It contributes, all the issues that have come up both in this session and other sessions you guys have been discussing. It contributes to land degradation, erosion, acidification or salination of land. For farmers especially, and here I refer to the country that I live in, India, there is a pressure to borrow money at the beginning of the season, so that you have money for irrigated water, you have money for pesticides, for fertilizers and so on. And often you cannot repay those debts. Often when you sell your crops, if there's a good crop, well, everyone had a good crop. So the price in the market goes down. If there's a bad crop, it will be a disaster. So whether it's good, whether it's bad, the farmers don't have enough. We have a case of, this is a conservative estimate, that 270,000 farmers have committed suicide in India since about 1995 as a result of this kind of policy. That is the most severe example, but in all of the countries that you are coming from, I'm sure there are similar examples. What is the revolution towards? Well, this is only part of it. I don't want to say this whole framework is a revolution. But it is something like what we actually describe as climate resilient sustainable agriculture. Reduce the dependency on inputs, work with farmers using low-cost techniques to better manage soil and land. And this is, in terms of the technical stuff, there's very basic, low-cost inputs that can be done. Often including just covering the soil using so-called green manure, multi-cropping. This is some of the basics of agroecology. There's a very famous Argentinian and Brazilian agroecologist who has done a lot of work on this over the years. One hurdle to this is that farmers do not have access to control over their land. And that would very much echo the earlier call that there be some implementation of the voluntary guidelines on land tenure and reform. That would be in the reform category, not the revolution one. I'd say that women farmers, when we do our studies from country to country, we find that male farmers tend to, by and large, be involved in farming for money, in the cash crop economy, in some kind of capitalist farming. But we find that women farmers are the ones who farm for the family, by and large. Therefore, supporting that, there's a contradiction, of course, in that the majority of hungry people in the world live in rural areas. So if we want to address that, I think investing in rural farmers and women rural farmers is extremely important. Some basic differences between the two models. Industrial agriculture is linear. You put stuff in, at the end of the season you have the crops, but you also have waste. You have stuff that is not consumed or that is not given to anyone. It's just thrown away. In sustainable agriculture, the outputs that you have, so the manure, whatever when you have the process of processing wheat or rice or whatever it is, the organic materials get used in the next season, or even they can be used in the same season. So this is a circle, it's cyclical, it is not linear. That is the main thing to say there. So we're involved in about 45 countries across the world. These are some examples. These are all from Southern Africa. I believe that's Zambia. I believe that's Tanzania. These are just some examples of communities that are working with different kinds of manure. Here you can see the use of plastic covering to ensure that nothing is degraded, nothing is eroded. Again, very cheap, very easy to produce this kind of stuff. Here we have some more examples. This is an example of rainwater harvesting. So alternatives to expensive irrigation and digging out wells. This is a picture I like to show. It's a picture of erosion. It's a picture of what doesn't. This is in Ethiopia, and if you can see at the bottom here, it's actually you've gone below the Earth's what you can grow. You've gone to the Earth's crust. The top stuff is all the organic all the organic matter is what we all live on, and it's only that few meters. It's about 2 meters or maybe 2.5 meters. That 2.5 meters that covers the Earth's surface is what keeps us all alive. Right? And it's all organic material. It needs care. A lot of it needs care. Some of it keeps us alive. Next steps, and here's where we get to some of the reformist part of the discussion. So yes, we need to implement the voluntary guidelines. We need to figure out, when we're talking about countries giving support for certain models or whatever to farmers, what kind of support are they giving? When I hear sometimes European countries talk about, we need to support farmers, or the US government talking about supporting farmers, you look at what they're actually doing. They're giving massive subsidies to their own agribusiness companies. That is not what we're talking about. So can we disaggregate? When we look at the total data, it's hard to tell how much of this is going to Monsanto and how much of this is going to a small farmer in Uganda. So let's actually disaggregate the data so we can figure out what's going on. Phase out the subsidies to big companies. It contributes to the bottom line. It's less clear that it contributes to global hunger. Whoops. More next steps. Just on the issue of climate change, I think we need to take seriously the changes that farmers are experiencing. We're beyond this issue of mitigation. We're talking about, we need to talk about loss and damage. We need to talk about many of the other things that came up in the previous session that some of you were at. And governments should prioritize this model, the sustainable agriculture model, and not the industrial agriculture model. The last thing I'll say, that just because it hasn't come up in the discussion so far, is that with the, there's a danger of false solutions. There's dangers of false solutions in a lot of what we do. But one false solution was this idea of biofuels. And what that has done, and many European companies and countries in the US, and put in subsidies for biofuels, and put in mandates, and put in targets for how much biofuels should be produced. That has produced competition for fuel and land for food, right? And we need to say that that's not sustainable. All the subsidies, all the targets, all the mandates need to be phased out. Land for food should be prioritized over this other stuff, and that will of course have an effect on the question of food price volatility. That will have an effect on the other thing. And the last thing that I'll say, just because of the discussion, so in addition to the biofuels piece, there is this question about reserves. There's this question about how do we keep prices down through actually stocking them either at the national level or at the regional level. I think the regional level is perhaps more realistic than a global level, certainly. So I think that's something that was on the G20 agenda that came up in 2010 in Cannes through different ways. Again, there's been no movement on this. So we would expect, in terms of reformist measures that could do something, we expect some serious investment into this question of food reserves at the regional level as well. Thank you.